Hey guys, tonight we're not wandering through cobbled streets or candle-lit corridors. Tonight we're stepping outside of history itself, so far back that no one has yet carved a name, drawn a map, or even dreamed of a wheel. The world around you hums with warmth. You can feel it in the heavy air, in the soft dirt that yields under your bare feet. This is Earth before it turned cruel, when rivers ran fat and brown with life. When the first sparks of human curiosity flickered somewhere between fear and wonder. You're not yet a farmer or a builder. You're a wanderer, part of a scattered species small enough to fit inside a single modern city. And you have no idea that the planet is about to test every instinct you've ever had. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the little constellation of places where these stories drift to life. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on a savanna that stretches forever, dotted with low trees and distant herds. The air smells of grass, sweat and rain. The sun is unblinking, generous. Nights are cool but forgiving. Life, for once, feels like something you can trust. You sleep under stars so bright they look close enough to touch. The world is noisy, crickets, wind, mammoths grumbling somewhere beyond the hills. But it's a friendly noise, the kind that reminds you that you belong here. For early humans, this warmth is everything. It's what allowed grasslands to feed the herds you follow, what filled rivers with fish and valleys with fruit. You wake each morning to the rhythm of survival, but it's not yet desperation. You gather, hunt, sing, rest. Fire is a friend, not yet a necessity. The world gives freely and you take only what you can carry. There are no cities, no kings, no punishments, just a slow heartbeat of seasons that seem eternal. But the planet beneath you is restless. It's easy to forget that the Earth moves, that it tilts and wobbles and breathes like a living creature. Somewhere far above the clouds, the orbit shifts just a little. Astronomers will one day call this a Milankovitch cycle, a dance between the sun and the Earth that changes how much warmth reaches the ground. Historians still argue whether this single cosmic twitch began the chain of events that would trap the planet in ice, or whether volcanoes or ocean currents carried equal blame. For you, none of that matters. You just notice that the rains come late, the nights get longer, and the mornings bite. At first, it's nothing alarming, just weather being moody. The older hunters mutter that the sky looks harder somehow, paler at dawn. The rivers shrink. Birds alter their migrations. Mammoths head north earlier than usual. But one summer, frost clings stubbornly to the grass long after sunrise. It sparkles like powdered sugar, beautiful and unfamiliar. The children laugh and stamp their feet to melt it. By afternoon it's gone, and everyone forgets. But the next year, it stays a little longer. The year after that, it never fully leaves. You still have warmth, but it's the kind that must be earned. Fires must be fed constantly. Meat spoils slower, which feels like a blessing until you realize it's because nothing alive can decay quickly in this cold. Trees grow slower, fruits are smaller. You start noticing that the wind has teeth. It gnaws at your cheeks, seeps into your bones. You wrap yourself in furs even while the sun is high. For a while the world holds steady, as if unsure whether to commit to this new chill. It's a stalemate between ice and life. Some valleys stay green, and you migrate toward them, joining other wandering groups. Languages mix, stories spread. Around shared fires you hear tales of lands farther north where the ground itself groans at night, cracking as if something vast moves beneath it. Few who go there return. Those who do come back speaking of mountains made of glass, massive white cliffs that advance slowly, crushing forests and rivers alike. You laugh it off. It sounds impossible, but a small, uneasy part of you wonders what kind of mountain moves. The world is still livable, but less friendly. The animals you hunt grow leaner, their bones sharper against the skin. Some vanish entirely. migrating to places you can't follow. Your people begin to travel farther for food. You see new landscapes, coastal cliffs, frozen lakes, endless plains of grey dust. Every place feels temporary now, as if the world is tidying up before closing for the season. A curious thing happens in this period of uncertainty. People become inventive. Necessity nudges you forward. You learn to stitch hides with bone needles, to shape better spear points, to carry fire instead of chasing it. The first sparks of creativity born from cold. Its strange discomfort breeds brilliance. You start decorating cave walls with ochre and charcoal, leaving proof that you were here, that you endured. Still, even the clever can't outsmart the sky. A year arrives when the sun simply seems weaker, days never quite warm, and nights stretch until you lose track of time. Snow begins to fall where no snow should exist. It buries the world in silence. You step outside your shelter one morning and realize you can't tell where the sky ends and the earth begins. The air stings your lungs. Every breath tastes metallic, as if you're inhaling the memory of stone. Historians will later call this transition the last glacial maximum, though they'll still debate exactly when it began, whether 30,000 years ago or closer to 20. For you, it's immediate, merciless, and personal. The warmth you took for granted has betrayed you. The same world that once fed you now demands payment for every heartbeat. You look at your hands, red and cracked from cold, and understand that survival is no longer a right. It's a skill. You pack what you can: firestones, hides, dried meat, bones sharpened into tools. The landscape shifts again. Forests withdraw, leaving behind skeletal trees etched in frost. The sun sits lower in the sky, as if exhausted. You watch it sink behind a wall of grey, and whisper a promise to chase it south if you have to. You won't stay to be buried in snow. The others nod silently. You don't have words for migration yet, but you understand the instinct: move or die. When you sleep that night, you dream of heat, of warm soil between your toes, of rain pounding on leaves. You wake to ice crystals on your eyelashes. The dream fades quickly, replaced by the crackling of your last fire. Outside, the wind is howling like an animal with no throat. You stand there for a long time, staring into the white nothing, knowing that beyond this horizon lies a different world entirely, one that will nearly erase you. And still, you go. You trudge south, though you don't really have a compass or even a word for south. You just move toward warmth, guided by the faint memory of it, the promise that somewhere the sun still feels kind. Your breath hangs in the air like smoke as you walk. The ground groans beneath your feet, a deep echo that sounds almost alive. The snow is new here, soft enough that each step sinks to the ankle, but it will harden soon, turning to glass. You stop every few minutes to check the horizon, though there's nothing to see. It's as if the world has erased itself. You begin to think this whiteness could go on forever. At first, the migration feels temporary, like a long hunt that never quite ends. You pass valleys that were once green, their rivers frozen mid-ripple. You follow the tracks of mammoths and steppe bison, the only creatures still bold enough to wander openly. They seem tireless, their great shadows fading into the mist, but even they look nervous, pausing often to lift their trunks and taste the air for change. You realize that no one, beast or human, knows where the safe places are anymore. The days stretch endlessly, muted by snow. The sky becomes a grey lid pressing closer and closer to the ground. The world has lost its colour. Even the blood of your kills freezes dark before it can stain the white. You remember when meat hissed over fire, dripping fat into the flames. Now it cooks sluggishly, never quite hot enough. You eat quickly before it ices again. Hunger grows inside you like a second heartbeat. Historians will one day call this era the Pleistocene glaciation. But for you, it's simply the time of endless winter. There are no calendars to mark years, no ink to record how long the cold has lasted. Your people measure time by the number of fires lit and extinguished, by the births that happen under firs and the deaths buried shallow beneath ice. You travel until your legs ache, then stop, build another fire, and stare into it as though it might whisper an explanation. Somewhere far behind, volcanoes still cough ash into the upper air, scattering sunlight like dust through glass. Scientists will argue for centuries about how much that ash deepened the cold, whether it turned the Earth's own warmth against itself. For you, it's just another unseen enemy. The sky looks pale, sickly, as though the sun is wrapped in gauze. When it does appear, it hangs there weakly, more memory than heat. There's one comfort left. Fire. You carry it carefully, feeding the embers inside a hollowed bone wrapped in hide. When the wind howls, you cradle it against your chest, the same way you'd hold a child. Fire has become your most precious tool, your god, your teacher. You learn its moods, the way it snarls when fed too fast, the way it sulks when given damp wood. Around it, your people huddle in silence, faces glowing like ghosts. Every flicker on the cave wall feels like a memory of the sun. Nights are the hardest. You lie awake listening to the wind crawl through cracks in the rock. It sounds like voices, sometimes familiar ones. Maybe it's just your mind trying to make sense of loneliness. When you sleep, you dream of green, of rivers running fat and lazy again. You wake disappointed, but you've learned not to curse the dreams. They remind you what you're fighting for. You see strange new lands as you travel, deserts of powdered snow where nothing grows, frozen forests that creak and shudder in the night, great walls of ice that reflect your own breath back at you. The cold shapes everything. Sound, light, even your thoughts. People start to move differently, slower, quieter, as if afraid of waking the world itself. When someone falls behind, they are simply gone. You mourn briefly, then keep walking. The ice doesn't wait for anyone. One morning, as the sun limps up the horizon, you find the remains of another band, bones picked clean, their tools scattered. The snow around them has melted slightly from decay. You recognize some of the symbols carved into their spears. They were neighbors once, months or maybe years ago. You wonder if they made it farther south before the cold chased them back. You whisper a quick blessing into the wind, though you don't know if there's anyone left to hear it. It's not all despair. There are moments of grace, fleeting but real. A hunt succeeds. A child is born. A storm clears long enough for you to see stars. Sharp, perfect pinpricks that make you feel tiny but also immortal. Under those stars you remember what warmth felt like, even if it's only the memory of it. The elders tell stories beside the fire, their voices slow and rasping. They speak of a time before the cold, of places where the sky was endless blue. You listen like a pilgrim hearing scripture, knowing you might never see those places but needing to believe they still exist. Food grows scarce. You eat roots, bark, frozen meat. Sometimes you find a cache of old bones cracked for marrow, and you know another tribe passed this way. You take what's left. The dead don't need it anymore. No one calls it stealing. Survival has its own laws now. The children learn them faster than you expect. They don't complain when the fires die too soon, or when the hides freeze stiff. They grow quiet, serious. You wonder if they will ever laugh the way you once did. Even in the worst nights, the will to endure refuses to die. You find a cave deep enough to hide from the wind, and there you light a new fire. The flame catches slowly, but when it does, it fills the walls with gold. You see your own shadow beside the others, stretching long and thin. For a moment it feels like you've tricked the darkness. You fall asleep knowing that tomorrow you'll move again, always toward that invisible promise of warmth. The cold might rule the world now, but not your heart, not yet. Historians still debate how few of you there were, maybe only a few thousand humans left on the planet. But somehow, against odds that seem impossible, you keep walking, you keep breathing. You keep teaching your children the shape of fire and the sound of laughter, even when it feels like both are fading. because somewhere deep inside, a stubborn thought refuses to freeze. The world has tried to kill you before, and you are still here. You wake to silence. Not the calm kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence that follows a blizzard's rage. The air feels thick in your throat, and for a moment you wonder if you've gone deaf. Then you hear it, the faint crackle of your fire still alive, the slow drip of melting frost from the ceiling of your shelter. The world outside, though, has stopped breathing. You step out and find it buried under an ocean of snow. Every shape you once knew is gone. Trees have become ghosts, their branches entombed in white. The river is gone too, replaced by a smooth expanse that reflects the colorless sky. Even sound seems to freeze. Your own breath leaves the only movement. This is the winter that will not leave. It's the one your grandchildren will tell stories about, if there are grandchildren left to tell them. The one that turns time into a loop of hunger, sleep, and the endless search for fuel. You learn quickly that fire eats faster than you can feed it. The forest, once generous, now hides its gifts under ice. Every twig you find feels like treasure. The smell of smoke clings to your skin, your hair, your dreams. When the fire burns low, you feel as though your own life is shrinking with it. Historians will one day call this the last glacial maximum, a time when ice swallowed continents and trapped the sea itself inside frozen walls. They'll estimate the temperature drop at only a few degrees, but those few degrees mean the difference between life and extinction. They'll debate the exact timing, whether it came in sudden jolts or slow strangulation. For you, the answer doesn't matter. You only know that yesterday's world has been stolen. Hunger becomes a neighbor you cannot escape. You feel it beside you even while you chew, whispering that there will never be enough. You scrape fat from hides, boil bones until they split, and chew sinew until your jaw aches. You start noticing how thin everyone has become. Faces sharpen into angles, eyes sink deeper. You ration hope the way you ration food, carefully in small bites. The worst part isn't the hunger or even the cold, it's the sameness. Every day looks like the last, and that sameness eats at the mind. You start talking to the fire as if it's listening, because it's the only thing that still responds. It crackles when you feed it, flares when you whisper too close. It feels alive in a way the rest of the world no longer does. In the glow, you can almost forget how empty the night beyond has become. Sometimes you find beauty even in this frozen prison. The sky clears after a storm, revealing stars that look sharper than ever, a net of silver flung across black. The aurora dances in green ribbons, shimmering like ghosts performing a slow, silent play. You don't have a name for it, but you watch it with your mouth slightly open, the way children stare at fireflies. It reminds you that the world, even when cruel, can still surprise you. Animals are fewer now, but the ones that remain have adapted in ways that almost feel supernatural. Mammoths with fur so thick it traps sunlight. Woolly rhinoceroses scraping frozen grass from the ground with blunt horns. Enormous wolves with shoulders like boulders, eyes bright and calculating. When they howl, the sound rolls across the ice like thunder. The earth answers back with cracks and echoes. You wonder if it's the world groaning, tired of its own weight. When you hunt, you go in silence. Your breath clouds before you like smoke signals, giving away your position. Your feet creak on the snow. Every mistake is death. Once you follow a herd of musk oxen for 2 days through blinding wind, only to find them standing perfectly still, frozen in place, eyes glassy, frost thick on their lashes. You stare for a long time, unable to decide whether to mourn or give thanks. The meat is hard as stone, but it's meat all the same. There are moments when you think about stopping, not dying exactly, just ceasing to try. The cold tempts you with strange gentleness. It doesn't roar, it whispers. It tells you that if you just close your eyes, it will all go quiet. You've seen others listen to that voice. They lie down just to rest, and never rise again. You bury them shallowly because the ground is too hard to dig deep. Later, you can't even find the spot again. The snow smooths it away as if the earth itself is cleaning up after your failures. And yet you keep going. There's something stubborn in your bones, something older than fear. It's not faith exactly. No god has stepped forward to claim this frozen kingdom, but it feels close. You wake each morning to the same impossible cold and tell yourself that survival, in itself, is worship. You eat what little you can. You tend the fire. You teach your children to strike flint and hide from the wind. These small rituals are the only prayers left. Historians still argue whether it was technology or sheer chance that saved your species. Maybe it was neither. Maybe it was something quieter, an instinct carved into the marrow, telling you that warmth is worth crawling toward no matter how far away it seems. You see that instinct in the way a mother cups her child's face near the fire, or how a hunter splits his last scrap of meat with the weakest among you. No one writes this down, but it's the only reason there's still anyone left to remember. The first thaw comes not with a roar but a sigh. One morning you wake to find water dripping steadily from the eaves of the cave. You touch it, half afraid it's an illusion. The sun feels a little stronger that day. A few flakes of snow loosen from the trees, fluttering down like ashes from a dying fire. The ice doesn't retreat quickly. It never does, but for the first time in what feels like lifetimes it moves backward instead of forward. You don't cheer. You're too tired for that. You just stand there breathing air that doesn't sting, and realize you've lived through something no story will ever capture fully. But deep down you know the cold isn't finished with you yet. It lingers at the edges, watching, waiting. The world might warm again, but the memory of frost has already taken root. It will follow your kind forever, written not in words but in the way you huddle close to the fire, the way you always glance south before winter. The ice age isn't just around you anymore, it's inside you. The sun returns, though it feels like a stranger now. It rises late and weak, its light more pale than gold, and you can stare at it without flinching. It warms your face, but only barely, more a memory of heat than the thing itself. The air smells different, almost sweet with thawing earth, but the sweetness feels wrong, dangerous, like fruit that's turned overnight. You and your people crawl out from the caves where you've slept like hibernating bears and blink against the glare. It's brighter than you remember. For a few heartbeats you almost believe that the nightmare is ending. The snow still lies heavy, though, an old, bitter guest who refuses to leave the table. When you walk, your feet sink deep, and water seeps through the seams of your boots. The rivers stir, groaning under their shells of ice. Somewhere in the distance you hear a deep, tearing crack, like the sound of the world splitting open. Glaciers, those silent monsters that have stalked the land for centuries, are shifting, collapsing under their own weight. You watch the mountains seem to bleed as meltwater rushes down their sides. It should be a good sign, but it feels ominous, like something too powerful to trust. Historians will later say this thaw marked the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden, violent change. They'll write about how the planet's climate seesawed wildly, warming, freezing, warming again, as if unsure which direction to die in. They'll debate whether melting ice sheets disrupted ocean currents, whether fresh water poured into the seas like poison, and flipped the planet's weather on its head. But standing here, knee-deep in mud that was snow yesterday, you don't need theories. You can feel it, the world's temper breaking like glass. The beasts return first. Not all of them. The great woolly mammoths are fewer now, and the cave lions have vanished like dreams, but there are still herds moving across the plains, thin and nervous. Birds sweep back from the south, trailing storms in their wake. Frogs croak in puddles that weren't there last week. It's life again, unmistakably, but it feels unstable, as if the whole planet is holding its breath. You follow the animals because they always seem to know more than you do. They lead you toward green shoots poking through the slush, toward valleys where rivers run free again. The thaw brings new dangers. The ground is treacherous, riddled with cracks where ice once lay thick. Water roars where there was silence, flooding paths you once walked safely. The air is warmer but unpredictable. Warm 1 hour, freezing the next. Storms come with no warning. You've survived cold that could turn flesh to stone, but this chaos feels worse. It's not just deathly, it's indecisive. The earth can't make up its mind whether it wants to live or die. One night, you sit by a fire that sputters and hisses in the damp air, and an elder begins to speak. He tells you that the world is not dying, only shifting its skin. The ice, he says, is alive. It breathes in and out, it eats and releases. You picture the world as a giant creature, sighing in its sleep. Maybe you've been living inside its dream, and now it's waking up. The story comforts you in a strange way, though you know it's probably just a story. But it fits, doesn't it? The world does feel like something half alive, angry one day, kind the next, testing you to see what you're made of. Food is easier to find now. The thaw releases the buried, the forgotten. You find carcasses trapped in the ice, preserved as if waiting for you. Some are fresh enough to eat, others serve as warnings of what happens to those who stood still too long. The earth, soft again, gives up roots and tubers, the faintest taste of sweetness returning to your mouth. You chew slowly, savoring it like a miracle. For the first time in years, your stomach doesn't ache constantly. You still eat sparingly. It's hard to unlearn fear, but you feel something stirring beneath your ribs. It takes you a while to name it. Hope. The fires burn differently now. You build them not only to survive, but to gather, to talk. People trade stories instead of just food. Someone hums a tune by accident and the sound is so strange, so gentle, that everyone stops to listen. It's been years since you've heard music. You don't realize how much you missed it until that moment. The song isn't long, just a few notes, but it feels like a spell cast against the cold. You hum it later, quietly, when no one is watching, and the sound feels like breathing again. But survival never forgets its lessons. You still hoard what you can. You still flinch when the wind changes. The cold has written itself into your blood. Even as the ice retreats, you dream of it every night, walls of white closing in, the world going silent. You wake sweating, clawing at the furs, afraid that you'll open your eyes and find yourself buried again. Some nights you can almost hear it, that faint grinding far to the north, the ice still moving, slow and patient, waiting for its chance to return. Historians still argue about how close you came to extinction. Some say humanity dwindled to a few thousand souls. Others insist it was even fewer. But you don't think of numbers. You think of faces. Those who didn't make it. Those whose laughter you can't quite remember now. You think of how easily this whole story could have ended with one more degree of cold, one more bad season. You realize that every breath you take is a rebellion against the odds. And so you keep moving. You follow the rivers south, where the trees grow thicker, where the air smells of rain instead of snow. You teach the children to walk softly, to listen for danger but also for birdsong. You tell them about the world that came before, the warm one, so they'll know what to dream of. They listen wide-eyed, not quite believing, but they'll remember. Stories are all that survive when everything else freezes. You pass yours on like fire. You don't know it yet, but you're the ancestor of everyone who will ever build, write, or wonder. You're the flickering thread of human stubbornness stretched across millennia. And though the cold will return someday, it always does, it will never quite win again. The memory of it will keep you ready, cautious, always watching the sky, because once, long ago, you almost vanished, and the world almost forgot your name, and you promised in your bones that it would never happen again. The rivers swell as the glaciers melt, but they are not the gentle rivers you once knew. They roar like beasts freed from their cages, gnawing through valleys and dragging forests into the sea. Every few days the landscape changes. Hills collapse, cliffs crumble, lakes form overnight where meadows used to lie. You can't trust the earth beneath your feet anymore. It feels restless, as though it resents your weight. Each rumble in the distance sounds like a warning. This is still the ice's world, and you're only borrowing space. You and your people follow the rivers anyway, because water means life. You build rafts from twisted wood and sinew, pushing through waters choked with ice and debris. The current bites cold enough to burn, but you keep your hands steady, guiding yourselves downstream. Sometimes you see enormous chunks of ice drift by, pale and blue as the sky that's finally beginning to show itself again. They spin lazily, gleaming like monuments to what once ruled this land. You can't decide if they look dead or merely asleep. Historians will later call this the Great Meltwater Flood, when ancient lakes burst their walls and reshaped continents. They'll debate where the floods hit hardest, whether in Europe, Asia, or the Americas. But the truth is, no corner of the world escaped untouched. For you, it's not history yet. It's the deafening sound of rushing water, the sting of wind on wet skin, the constant fear that the next bend in the river will carry you off the edge of the world. At night, you find high ground and rest. You build fires that hiss and spit in the damp, trying to dry hides stiff with frost. The air smells of wet ash and clay. You stare into the flames and watch the steam curl upward, vanishing into darkness. It's strange. After so long fearing the cold, you now fear the thaw. Warmth has made the world unpredictable again. You whisper to the others that you'd rather freeze than drown. No one disagrees. Still, there is beauty in this chaos. The world feels alive in a way it hasn't for centuries. Grass pushes through cracks in the mud, trembling like it's unsure it belongs. Wildflowers bloom beside ice, defiant splashes of color against a world that had forgotten what color looked like. You catch fish fat from the rivers, their scales glittering like silver coins. Every bite tastes like a promise that the earth isn't done with you yet. One evening you find the remains of another camp, smoke-stained stones, a ring of bones, the faint smell of something burnt and sweet. They must have left in a hurry, abandoning half-cooked meat and tools. You recognize the craftsmanship, the way the flint is chipped. It's the work of your cousins, the people from beyond the valley. You wonder where they went, whether the river took them or if they found something better farther south. You take their tools, murmuring thanks to the ghosts who left them. In this new world, ownership is a luxury no one can afford. The nights are strange now. Humid, heavy, filled with sounds you'd forgotten. Frogs croak. Insects buzz. Sometimes you hear thunder, distant but unmistakable. The first storm catches you unprepared. Lightning claws across the horizon, splitting the dark in two. The rain falls so hard it feels like the sky itself is breaking apart. You and the others huddle under hides, laughing and crying all at once. You've forgotten that rain can be warm. The air fills with the scent of wet earth and ozone, and for the first time in years you smell life. The storm passes quickly, but you remember it forever. It's proof that the world hasn't died. It was just sleeping. Historians still argue about what humans did during these volatile centuries. Some say your ancestors hid, retreating to caves and valleys too afraid to risk exploration. Others insist that this was the dawn of invention, that necessity forced you to create tools, clothing, even language more complex than ever before. They might both be right. You have become many things at once, fearful, brilliant, desperate, divine. You shape bone into needles, carve maps into wood, paint your history on cave walls because you've learned that the sky can't be trusted to remember it for you. The animals that survived beside you have changed too. They're smaller now, leaner, quicker. The giants, mammoths, aurochs, saber-tooth still roam, but their ghosts fading at the edges of their own age. You feel their absence before they're gone, the way you feel silence after a song. One day your children will ask if the world was really once full of beasts that could crush trees and shake mountains. You'll nod, though you'll struggle to remember the sound of their footsteps. Even extinction, it seems, can be forgotten. The thaw brings new places to explore. The sea creeps inland, swallowing old paths and creating new ones. You follow its salty scent until you reach its edge, a vast grey expanse stretching forever. You dip your hand into it, tasting the cold brine, and realize that it's older than anything you know. The ocean sighs and retreats, leaving shells glittering in the mud. You feel small again, but not in the same way you did in the ice. This smallness is gentler, like being a child in something ancient's arms. You build shelters near the coast, simple, low structures of bone and hide. The wind howls through them at night, carrying the smell of salt and smoke. You fall asleep listening to waves slap against frozen sand, half afraid they'll rise and take you in your sleep. The moon, huge and swollen, glows through the mist. You don't know what it is, but you feel its pull, a silver whisper reminding you that the world is still turning, that the cycles of light and dark still matter. You make peace with the idea that some things are too big to understand. One night, as you watch the stars flicker, you realize that the world has changed you too. Your skin is thicker, your instincts sharper. You can read the sky's moods, taste the weather before it arrives. You've learned to move when it moves, rest when it rests. You've become a creature of rhythm again, not the lazy, sun-fed rhythm of the warm world, but a harder, wiser one. You feel older than your years, and maybe you are. The cold has taught you things warmth never could: patience, gratitude, endurance. And though you would never say it aloud, a part of you will miss the quiet of the snow, the way it made every heartbeat sound sacred. The world breathes again. So do you. You wake one morning to a world unrecognizable. The ice has retreated, leaving behind a land that looks wounded but alive. The air smells raw, damp soil, decaying leaves, the faint musk of animals that have returned to claim what the frost once stole. You step outside your shelter and see mist rising from the ground like breath. The silence of centuries has been replaced by a low hum, insects, birds, the distant roar of rivers no longer locked in ice. It's almost too loud. For so long you've known only the whisper of snow. Now the world feels crowded again, noisy with life. You are part of the first humans to walk through this reborn wilderness, though you don't know that yet. You just know that every step feels like trespass. The earth is soft underfoot, trembling with thaw. Puddles reflect a pale blue sky, and you stop to stare at your reflection, older, leaner, with eyes that no longer look surprised by anything. The sun is strong enough to sting your skin again. You squint against it, torn between joy and suspicion. Warmth has betrayed you before. You and your people travel slowly now, not fleeing the cold but following the growth. Ferns push up from the mud, fat with dew. Herds of reindeer graze on patches of grass that sparkle with moisture. Birds nest in cliffsides that were once walls of ice. The world is reinventing itself before your eyes. Historians will one day call this the Holocene transition, the dawn of the age that would eventually belong to humans. They'll trace pollen in ancient mud and say this was when the first forests were reborn. But for you it's simpler. You call it the return. You find the first forests days later. Young trees, thin and flexible, crowd the valleys. The scent is dizzying. Resin, bark, sap, wet moss. It feels like stepping into a memory you never lived but somehow recognize. Fire crackles at night without the sting of snow. You no longer huddle from the cold. You sit around the flames and talk. The stories have changed. They are no longer just about survival, but about purpose, about what comes next, now that the world has stopped trying to kill you. The old ones warn that the cold will come back, because that's what cold does. It waits. They tell stories about spirits trapped in glaciers, sleeping gods that will one day stir again. You listen but don't argue. You've learned not to mock old fears. Still, you can't help noticing that the children born now don't flinch when the wind picks up. They've never known real hunger. They laugh freely. You envy them, a little, for not understanding how fragile all this still is. The thaw, though, brings new challenges. Rivers flood without warning. The ground shifts beneath your shelters. Once the sky fills with a dark cloud that moves like smoke but makes no sound. You realize too late. It's a swarm of insects, biting, humming, endless. You run from them, waving smoke and curses, but they follow like vengeance. You discover that warmth has its own kind of cruelty. It doesn't crush you instantly like the cold. It wears you down with small, persistent discomforts. You scratch your arms until they bleed and joke that the ice was simpler. Everyone laughs, but only halfway. There's a new kind of hunger now, not the gnawing emptiness of starvation, but the hunger for more, for understanding, for control. You start experimenting again. Stones are shaped not just for hunting, but for craft. Spears become lighter, more elegant. You carve hooks, traps, and ornaments that serve no purpose but to look beautiful. The first sparks of art bloom in your mind like wildfire. You paint animals not out of fear or worship, but because they're beautiful, because you remember them running across frozen fields and want them to live forever in color. The walls of caves become your paper, the ochre, your ink. The act feels holy. You don't know it, but you're inventing memory. Historians still argue whether art began as ritual or simply as joy, whether it was meant to honor survival or distract from it. But for you, it's instinctive. You press your hand to the stone and leave its outline behind. It's not vanity. It's proof. The world erased so much of your past, and this is your way of defying it. The earth may bury you someday, but at least this mark will stay. The animals evolve faster than you can keep track of. Horses grow smaller, quicker. Wolves begin to follow your camps, scavenging from your kills. At first you throw stones to chase them away, but they keep coming back, cautious but patient. One night, a wolf curls near your fire instead of fleeing, eyes glowing amber in the dark. You toss it a scrap of bone, half as a test, half as a bribe. It takes it, gnaws, then stays. The next night, there are two. You don't realize it yet, but this small exchange, meat for companionship, will change the story of your species forever. One morning you find flowers blooming through the frost. Their petals are fragile, trembling in the wind, yet impossibly bright. You crouch to touch one and feel warmth where it shouldn't be. You call to the others, and for a long time no one speaks. The flower isn't food, isn't shelter, isn't anything useful, and yet everyone stares like it's the most important thing they've ever seen. You realize for the first time that the world is not only a thing to survive, but a thing to love. Historians will later call this your turning point. The moment humanity stopped simply enduring and began imagining. They'll say the Ice Age taught you humility, that from cold came patience, from hunger came ingenuity. Maybe they're right. But standing here, with the thaw dripping from the trees and a single yellow flower in your palm, you don't feel like a survivor or an inventor. You just feel human, small, foolish, grateful. That night, the stars return brighter than ever, mirrored in the puddles and rivers below. You lie awake, staring up at them, realizing you've seen the sky change in ways few ever will. You've lived through a story the earth will tell for millions of years. The cold almost erased you, but in its trying, it made you eternal. The warmth has returned, but peace hasn't. You learn quickly that a world recovering from ice can be just as deadly as one trapped beneath it. The rivers flood unpredictably. Lakes burst their banks, swallowing whole valleys. Great walls of water carve new paths through the land, cutting deep scars where the glaciers once stood. The sound of it is constant, a low, rumbling pulse, as if the earth itself has a heartbeat again. Sometimes you wake at night and mistake it for thunder, until you realize the ground itself is moving beneath you. You feel it in your bones. This new world isn't done growing yet. Your people have changed too. You walk taller, faster, hungrier, for more than just warmth. You've started building in ways you never did before. Circles of stone, trenches for storage, shelters half sunk into the ground for insulation. The Ice Age forced you to travel, but now, for the first time, you're staying put. The idea feels strange. You miss the movement, the rhythm of chasing herds and seasons. Staying still feels dangerous, like daring the world to notice you again. But the soil is rich now, and berries grow in clusters so heavy they bow the branches. You plant what seeds you can find, not knowing whether they'll grow, only that it feels right to try. You've never sown anything before except hope. The animals are restless too. Mammoths still roam in dwindling numbers, enormous and weary, their tusks curved like moons. You follow them sometimes, not to hunt, but to remember. You've eaten their kind before, prayed over their bones, painted their shapes on walls. They've been part of your story for as long as you can recall. But now you can sense the end of theirs. They move slowly through the wet grass, their massive feet sinking into mud that used to be snow. You wonder if they're looking for the world they used to know. You understand that feeling all too well. Historians will later say that this was the twilight of the megafauna, the great beasts that had ruled the ice. They'll debate whether it was the warming climate or you, the clever predator, that ended them. Some will argue you overhunted. Others will insist the grasslands simply vanished beneath the rising forests. You don't think of it that way. You only know that when the last of the mammoths disappear beyond the horizon, something inside you feels smaller. The world is emptier without them. Without the giants to chase, you turn to smaller prey. Deer, boar, fish. You craft traps and nets instead of spears. You learn patience, the kind that waits in silence for hours, listening to the river's pulse. The forest becomes your teacher. You learn which mushrooms feed you and which ones trick you into seeing ghosts. You start recognizing the calls of birds not as background noise but as warnings, signals. The world is talking again, and you're finally learning its language. Fire, once a desperate tool, has become your companion. You build it not only for warmth but for craft. You harden wooden tips in the flames, bake clay into bowls, smoke meat for storage. The orange glow that once kept you alive now gives you time. Time to think, to make, to dream. Around the fire, you tell stories of the old world, of the white silence and the great beasts that walked through it. The children listen with wide eyes, shivering at the idea of endless snow. They've never seen frost thick enough to kill. They think you're exaggerating. You don't correct them. Let them believe the cold is just another story. Let them laugh before the next winter reminds them it's real. One night, a storm rolls in from the west. The air feels wrong, too warm, too heavy. You can smell rain before you see it. When it comes, it doesn't fall softly. It lashes sideways, tearing leaves from trees, filling the air with a roar so loud it drowns your thoughts. Lightning rips open the sky. It hits a tree nearby, splitting it in half. You jump back, heart hammering. The others shout, but the sound disappears into the wind. When the storm passes, you stand among smoking trees, stunned by how fragile everything still is. For all your cleverness, all your progress, one flash from the heavens can still unmake you. The next morning, you find the lightning-struck tree smoldering. Inside, a single branch glows red, still alive with heat. You kneel, blow gently, and the flame flares back to life. It feels like stealing fire from the gods. You carry it carefully back to camp, and for the first time you feel like a creator, not just a survivor. The others watch you feed it, eyes shining. Fire no longer feels borrowed, it feels owned. Historians will say this was the moment when humanity began to master its world. You've already domesticated wolves into dogs, begun shaping stone with precision, and now you command fire like a craftsman instead of a child. But mastery comes with consequences. You notice the forests shrinking faster, the game thinning out. For every tree you fell, the birds vanish a little more. You don't mean harm, you're just trying to live, but the world feels smaller for it. You sense it even if you don't understand it. Each time you look at the horizon, it feels closer. At night, when you close your eyes, you still dream of the ice. You see it creeping down mountainsides, swallowing rivers, devouring forests. Sometimes it calls your name, whispering in a voice like cracking glass. You wake in a sweat, staring at the flicker of your fire until dawn. The cold is gone, but not forgotten. It has marked you, shaped you. Even as the air grows thick with heat and insects, you pull your furs tighter around you at night, just in case. The world keeps changing faster than you can name it. Seasons blend, rains come early, and the stars drift slowly across the sky in patterns unfamiliar to the elders. You start noticing that no one agrees on what normal feels like anymore. But there's one thing everyone agrees on: the earth is alive. It growls and sighs and trembles, and you are lucky to still walk upon its back. As you fall asleep to the sound of the forest breathing, you realize that you're no longer a creature of ice or fire. You are something in between. You've seen the world nearly die, and now you're watching it rebuild itself. You are the bridge between two earths, the witness to its rebirth, and though you've lost much, you've gained something rarer than warmth. Understanding. You finally see what the ice tried to teach you all along, that survival is not about strength or fury, it's about patience, and listening and knowing when to move and when to wait. You close your eyes, the air heavy with the scent of rain, and for the first time you sleep without fear. The world has softened, but it hasn't calmed. The air is thick with the smell of growth, wet leaves, fresh mud, and decay all at once. Forests now stretch where ice once ruled, their canopies whispering with life. You walk beneath them like a trespasser in a cathedral. Every rustle a reminder that you're not quite in control here. The ground is soft, sometimes treacherous, riddled with puddles that reflect the dappled light above. You've traded the white silence of the Ice Age for a world loud with insects and birds, and though it's beautiful, it's also overwhelming. After centuries of surviving a frozen wasteland, you've forgotten how to live in a world that doesn't want to kill you immediately, but might anyway. Your people have grown clever. The tools you carry now are different from the ones your ancestors gripped in trembling fingers beside glacial fires. Spears are balanced, stone blades are thin as reeds, and for the first time, you carry more than you need to survive. Some tools are simply pretty, etched with lines, carved into shapes that mean something, even if you can't quite say what. You realize that beauty itself has returned to the world. That's how you know the ice is truly gone. When humans have time to decorate again, the planet must finally be breathing. You find signs of others, footprints in the mud, scraps of hide, campfire stones half buried in moss. The world feels crowded now, though you've never met more than a few dozen strangers in your life. Sometimes you smell smoke drifting on the wind, faint but distinct from a fire you didn't light. You follow it once, out of curiosity, creeping through the trees until you see them. People like you, yet not. Their faces are sharper, their voices strange. They wear necklaces made of teeth and shells. They see you too, and everyone freezes. Then, after a long silence, one of them laughs softly and offers you food, a handful of roasted seeds. You take it. You share yours in return. For the first time in generations, peace is possible. Historians will one day call this era the beginning of human convergence, when isolated bands of survivors met again after tens of thousands of years apart. They'll say it was a turning point, when culture and language began to braid together. You don't have those words, of course. You just know the fire burns brighter when there are more people around it. You learn their gestures, their jokes. You trade stories about the cold, though everyone remembers it differently. Some say the ice swallowed the world as punishment. Others say the sky forgot how to shine. Everyone agrees that it was real, and that none of you will ever forget the sound of snow falling on the last embers of a dying fire. But with plenty comes restlessness. The hunt no longer feels like a necessity. It feels like sport. You begin experimenting with traps and pens, keeping small animals alive instead of eating them right away. It feels odd at first, unnatural. You've always been a wanderer, but one morning you wake to find a wild goat that didn't run away. It lingers near camp, nosing the ground for scraps. The children feed it bits of bark and laugh when it bleats. You watch, intrigued. You wonder if this is how the ice felt. Patient, slow, reshaping the world without anyone noticing. You're not trying to rule nature. You're trying to understand it. Historians will debate endlessly whether agriculture began as an accident or an idea. They'll call this the dawn of the Neolithic Revolution, when humans stopped chasing food and started convincing food to come to them. You wouldn't recognize it as a revolution, though. To you, it's simply convenience. The difference between waking hungry and waking full. You still move when the seasons demand it, but less often now. You build better shelters. You gather in larger groups. You share responsibilities. One person naps stone. Another gathers herbs. Someone watches the fire while the rest sleep. It feels safer but also more complicated. People argue more now. Bicker over who deserves what. You almost miss the simplicity of hunger. It made decisions for you. The weather too seems to have learned your habits. It toys with you. After months of warmth, one morning brings frost again. Just a dusting thin, fragile gone by noon. But it sends a shiver down everyone's spine. The elders whisper that the ice is testing you, making sure you haven't forgotten who's in charge. The children don't understand why everyone looks so frightened. You smile for their sake, but inside your heart beats faster. You know what it's like when frost doesn't melt. That night, you build the fire higher than usual. You tell stories of the great white silence, the mammoths, the endless nights. You describe how the stars used to feel closer, as though the whole universe was huddling to stay warm. The younger ones listen wide-eyed, unable to imagine such a world. They fall asleep before you finish. You stay awake long after, watching the flames shrink. When the last coal fades, you see your reflection in the dark and realize that something of that frozen world still lives behind your eyes. You begin noticing the world healing itself in strange ways. Moss covers old bones. Trees grow in the footprints of vanished beasts. Even the ice far to the north doesn't seem so menacing anymore. You can almost picture it as a sleeping animal, retreating into its den. You wonder if the earth itself needed the rest, that maybe for all its cruelty, the cold was a kind of reset. You can't decide whether that makes you feel comforted or small. The sea is rising now, slowly, but you can see it when you visit the old camps near the coast. The places where you once gathered driftwood are underwater. The beaches narrowed, the air saltier. It's subtle, almost gentle, but unmistakable. You joke that the ocean is trying to take back what it loaned. You build your shelters a little farther inland, but you keep coming back to the water anyway. The horizon has always held your curiosity. It's where everything unknown begins. Historians will later say that humanity's true genius wasn't its strength or its weapons. It was adaptability. You've changed more in a few thousand years than any creature in history. You've endured fire, ice, flood, famine, and each time you didn't just survive, you learned. You found new ways to exist, to bend the rules without breaking them. The ice nearly erased you, but it also shaped you into something the earth had never seen before, a species that remembers. When you sleep that night, you dream not of snow or hunger, but of the future, of fields and homes, of laughter, of warmth that doesn't vanish with the seasons. You dream of children running barefoot through tall grass, their shadows long and golden. You don't know what kind of world they'll inherit, but you do know this: whatever comes, they'll be ready, because they'll carry your memory, the story of how you walked through ice and fire and didn't disappear. The years blur, and the old fears begin to fade. The frost that once ruled your every breath has retreated so far north that it feels like myth, a ghost story to scare restless children into silence. But even as the ice melts, its fingerprints remain etched into valleys, carved into stone, whispering under your feet. The rivers, once choked with frozen death, are now swollen with life. Fish shimmer beneath the surface like moving silver, and birds return in flocks so large they blot out the sun. You can't help but stare upward, awed and uneasy, remembering the empty skies of the cold years. The noise of their wings feels like a miracle you're not quite ready to trust. Your people are no longer nomads. The days of following herds are fading into memory. The first permanent camps are forming, rings of huts, stone-lined hearths, walls patched with clay and woven reeds. They smell of smoke, sweat, and something new, belonging. You find yourself returning to the same place each year, marking the changing seasons not by the threat of death, but by the growth of children, the ripening of fruit, the migration of geese. You are learning how to wait. It's an entirely new skill, this patience without fear. It begins slowly. This transformation. You notice that certain seeds, when dropped near your fire pit, sprout the next spring. You start gathering them deliberately, pressing them into the ground near the camp, curious to see what will happen. At first it feels like a trick, plants that grow where you want them to. But soon the trick becomes a habit. You realize you no longer have to wander to eat. The land itself can feed you, if you learn to listen to it. Historians will call this the dawn of agriculture, the end of prehistory, the beginning of civilization. You would simply call it learning to trust the earth again. You build granaries, simple pits lined with stone covered with branches to keep food dry. The fear of hunger, the one that ruled your ancestors' lives, still lingers, so you store more than you need. When winter comes, it's still harsh, but it's no longer a sentence. You can feel the difference in your bones. The fire burns lower, quieter. It's no longer a desperate plea for survival, but a steady companion, a kind of heartbeat that never fades. You find yourself singing sometimes while tending it. The songs are low and repetitive, almost like the sound of wind through grass. No one taught you these melodies. They rise out of the rhythm of safety. But the world beyond your small camp is restless. The ice continues to melt, feeding rivers that snake across the land in unpredictable ways. Sometimes they rise overnight, drowning fields, uprooting the very seeds you planted. Other times they vanish, swallowed by cracks in the drying earth. The climate is not your friend, it is a teacher, impatient and moody. You've learned to expect that lessons come with bruises. One morning the sky glows orange, not from sunrise but from dust. The air smells of sulfur. Somewhere far away the earth is shaking, coughing up its anger through smoke and ash. You remember the stories the elders told, of how darkness once fell for weeks, how the sun grew sick behind veils of soot. Historians will one day say that volcanic eruptions punctuated the end of the Ice Age, throwing the planet between warmth and cold like a coin. You don't have the science for that, but you can feel it in the pit of your stomach. The earth hasn't finished testing you. The next few years blur again. The weather turns strange. Hot one season, freezing the next. Crops fail. You see your people look to the sky for answers, to the rivers, to the trees. Someone begins marking patterns in the stars, noticing how they shift slightly each night. Someone else carves symbols into bones, a way to keep track of moons and seasons. You don't know it yet, but these small acts, these scratches and notches will become writing. Memory, once carried only in stories, now starts to live in stone. You find yourself missing the simplicity of the old days sometimes. The hunt, the chase, the raw immediacy of survival. Now, life is slower, but the questions are bigger. Why does the sun move? Why do the rivers flood? Why does the wind change without warning? You start naming the answers: spirits, gods, ancestors. The stories grow more elaborate, each one explaining a different cruelty or kindness of the earth. You teach your children that the frost was not a punishment, but a teacher, that everything you have, the crops, the tools, the warmth, exists because the cold once made you strong enough to earn it. The animals that survived have become companions, not competitors. The wolves that linger near your camps no longer steal your food, they guard it. The children name them. One of them gives birth by your fire, and you keep one of the pups. You call it Shadow, because it never leaves your side. You feed it bits of fish until it licks your fingers and curls up beside you. Historians will one day call this the domestication of dogs, but for you, it's simply friendship, the first of its kind between species. It feels like another fire lit against the dark. Years turn to generations. Your camp becomes a village, and the paths your ancestors once wandered turn into roads. The ice that nearly killed you becomes legend, something recited around the hearth as the stars wheel overhead. Children giggle when you tell them about mammoths, as if such beasts could never have existed. You laugh too because you understand. They can't imagine hunger or endless snow. Their world is warmer, greener, safer. You realize that this is what you suffered for, that someday someone could grow up without knowing fear. Historians will still argue whether your survival was luck, adaptation, or divine will. Maybe it was all three. You don't care about theories. You care about this: the crackle of your fire, the laughter of your children, the rhythm of rain on your roof. You've seen the world nearly die, and now you're watching it heal. You know better than to take it for granted. You plant your seeds, feed your fire, and whisper gratitude to the night. But deep in your dreams, when the air turns cold and the stars sharpen, you sometimes see it again, the slow, creeping wall of ice, the silence that swallows everything. You wake sweating, staring into the dark, and remind yourself that it's over. Then, to be safe, you add another log to the fire. It begins with quiet. Not the silence of death, but the stillness that comes after a storm has finally run its course. The earth exhales. You can feel it in the air, soft, heavy, sweet, with damp earth and grass. The rivers no longer rage, though they still carry the ghost of their old fury in their restless ripples. Forests rise tall and thick now, shading valleys that once lay bare under ice. The last of the glaciers glint faintly on the horizon, retreating further every season, shrinking into memory. The world is finally warming, properly this time. The cold that ruled you for generations is gone, but it has left fingerprints everywhere. You wake one morning to sunlight spilling through the gaps in your roof. The world hums outside. You hear bees for the first time, tiny shimmering creatures that sound like sparks. Their song is fragile, but relentless. You smile without realizing it. It's been years since your people feared winter's shadow. Now you fear something stranger: peace. You've built a life around struggle. You know how to fight frost, how to stretch a meal, how to keep fire alive through wind and snow. But this warmth, you're not sure what to do with it. You walk through your settlement slowly, bare feet sinking into mud warmed by the sun. The air smells of smoke, fruit, and sweat. There are new things everywhere: woven baskets, clay pots drying in the sun, animals wandering lazily through the fields. The world no longer feels temporary. Every tree seems older overnight, every face around you more sure of its place in this new forgiving age. You feel the strange pull of something you can't name: home. The children born now have never seen snow thick enough to bury a fire. They listen with fascination when you tell them of the white deserts, the starving herds, the nights so cold that breath froze mid-air. They laugh in disbelief, the way you once laughed at tales of talking spirits and magic rivers. You can't blame them. The sun has been generous for so long now that the idea of an endless winter sounds impossible. You want to warn them, but you don't. Let them live without the weight of memory. The earth for now seems kind. Historians will one day call this the true beginning of the Holocene, the era of warmth and stability that allowed everything human to flourish. They'll say the glaciers retreated for good, sea levels rose, and humanity scattered across every corner of the planet. But for you, it isn't history. It's daily life. It's the rhythm of sunrise and harvest, of laughter and firelight. It's the first time your people can plan for more than tomorrow. You begin building not for survival but for legacy. Stone replaces bone. Clay replaces hide. You dig into the earth to find what's hidden: ochre, flint, obsidian. The ground itself becomes a tool. You learn to grind grain, to shape mud into walls that dry hard as rock. You even shape fire, trapping it inside ovens, coaxing it to cook rather than devour. The world you once fought now serves you. For the first time you feel almost godlike, and that frightens you more than the ice ever did. The elders warn against arrogance. They still remember. They still wake in the night when the wind howls and reach for the fire, certain that the frost has returned. They teach the children to respect the land, to never take too much, to leave offerings when the hunt is good. You listen, but part of you wonders if those warnings will fade too, as the cold fades from memory. Maybe they already are. One night you walk to the river's edge alone. The moon ripples across the water full and gold. You crouch and touch the surface. It's warm. You remember when rivers were slabs of glass, when your reflection was trapped beneath them, unreachable. Now it looks back at you, older but alive. You trace the scars on your hands, reminders of frostbite, of hunger, of fire's bite when you clutched it too close. You realize how much of what you are was carved by suffering. The world may have softened, but you carry the hard lessons still. Historians still debate how close humanity came to extinction during the last great ice age. Some claim only a few thousand survived, scattered, frightened, huddled in caves. Others argue it was never so dire, but they all agree on one thing: you shouldn't have made it. The math doesn't favor you. The climate, the predators, the scarcity, all of it said you would vanish like the mammoth, but you didn't. You endured, and in doing so you reshaped the story of life itself. The children of your children will spread across the earth. They'll find new lands, new suns, new dangers. They'll build walls, cities, empires. They'll carve gods in their own image and forget, for a time, how fragile they really are. They'll curse droughts and floods, but they won't know that they're only echoes of what came before, the earth remembering its own rhythm. The ice may return one day, it always does, but they'll be ready, because somewhere deep in their blood, in their bones, will be your memory, the stubborn pulse that refused to stop beating, even when the world froze. The fire beside you crackles softly, smaller now, more domestic. You don't need to huddle against it anymore. It's simply there, a comfort, a habit. You close your eyes and listen to it whisper. Outside, the wind moves through the trees in a way that almost sounds like the sea, like waves brushing over sand. You imagine the ice far away, glittering faintly under the stars, not dead but dreaming. You whisper into the night, not a prayer, not a plea, just gratitude. Gratitude that you were born in a time that taught you what it means to fight for warmth. Gratitude that, against all reason, you survived. And as you drift towards sleep, the world breathes with you, slow, deep, content. The age of ice has ended, and the age of memory has begun.